It was a quiet Tuesday night at a small-town bar, the kind of place where the regulars always outnumber the strangers. Amy, the bartender, was preparing to close. The last customer had left an hour ago, but she lingered behind the bar, finishing her inventory and counting the till. The soft hum of the bar's overhead lights and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards were the only sounds accompanying her. The bar had a basement, a dimly lit, musty space where they kept extra kegs, cleaning supplies, and boxes of liquor. Amy hated going down there. Something about the air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and she always had the unsettling feeling of being watched. The employees often joked about the bar ghost, but Amy didn't find it funny. Too many times she'd heard faint noises when she was alone, a whisper, a footstep, or the unmistakable sound of something being dragged across the floor. But tonight, she had no choice. They were running low on lager, and the shipment wouldn't come until morning. With a sigh, she grabbed the heavy flashlight they kept behind the counter and made her way to the basement door. The door creaked loudly as she opened it, revealing the steep wooden stairs that led down into darkness. She flipped the switch at the top of the stairs, but the single bulb dangling from the ceiling barely illuminated the space below. Descending the creaky wooden stairs, Amy's flashlight flickered. She cursed under her breath and smacked it against her palm, coaxing the light back to life. The basement was eerily silent except for the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. Shadows stretched across the room, warped and elongated by the dim light. She grabbed a keg and turned to head back upstairs, but she froze in her tracks. A figure stood at the base of the stairs. At first, she thought it was her reflection in the mirrored wall at the far end, but as she shifted slightly, the figure stayed still. It was tall and shadowy, with no discernible features. Her pulse quickened, and her breath caught in her throat. Before she could react further, a low, guttural voice echoed through the room. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was deep, inhuman, and seemed to reverberate through her very bones. Dropping the keg, she bolted up the stairs, her footsteps pounding against the wood as the figure remained rooted in place. She slammed the door shut behind her, locking it with trembling hands. Her heart was racing as she grabbed her phone and called her manager, her voice shaky as she recounted what had happened. The manager, half asleep and unimpressed, brushed it off as exhaustion and an overactive imagination. "You've been working too many late shifts," he said dismissively. "Go home and get some rest." But Amy couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. She left the bar, her eyes constantly darting over her shoulder as she walked to her car. That night, she barely slept, haunted by the image of the shadowy figure and the sound of its voice. The next day, her manager went to check the basement, determined to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. When he didn't return after several minutes, the assistant manager went down after him. What they found made their blood run cold. The mirror at the far end of the basement was shattered. Shards of glass scattered across the floor. But that wasn't all. On the wall behind where the mirror had hung were deep scratches, jagged and uneven, as if someone or something had clawed at the concrete. No one could explain the scratches or how the mirror had broken. The bar's basement was closed permanently after that night. Staff refused to go down there, and deliveries were rerouted to avoid the space entirely. Amy never returned to work, too shaken by the experience. She swore she could still hear the voice in her nightmares, a chilling reminder of the shadowy figure that had told her, "You shouldn't be here." Jake had been a bouncer for years. He'd seen fights, drunks, and everything in between, but nothing prepared him for the man in the red coat. It was a busy Friday night, and the bar was packed. The air buzzed with the sounds of laughter, music, and clinking glasses. Jake stood near the entrance, scanning the crowd for any signs of trouble. That's when he noticed the man. He was sitting alone at the far end of the bar, sipping a drink and smiling. His eyes seemed to sparkle unnaturally in the dim light, almost as if they were reflecting something that wasn't there. Something about him didn't sit right with Jake. The man wasn't interacting with anyone, but every few minutes he let out a soft, chilling laugh. It wasn't the laugh of someone enjoying themselves. It was cold and unsettling, as if he knew something no one else did. Other patrons seemed to avoid him, instinctively giving him a wide berth as they moved about the bar. Around midnight, Jake decided to approach him. "Hey, buddy, you doing okay?" he asked, his tone firm but polite. The man slowly turned to face him. Up close, his features were even more disturbing. His skin looked waxy, almost unnatural, and his grin stretched wider than it should have, as though his face were a mask being pulled taut. "Oh, I'm just waiting," the man replied in a voice that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. "They'll be here soon." "Who's they?" Jake asked, trying to maintain his composure. But the man just chuckled softly, his laughter echoing unnervingly in the noisy bar. Without another word, he turned back to his drink, his unnerving grin never fading. Jake decided to keep an eye on him from a distance. Minutes later, the lights flickered. At first, the patrons laughed it off, assuming it was a power surge. But when the lights went out completely, a sudden hush fell over the bar. In the oppressive darkness, Jake thought he heard the man's laugh again, louder this time and more sinister. The power returned after a few seconds, and everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the man in the red coat was gone. His drink sat untouched on the counter, the ice cube still perfectly intact, and his stool was ice cold, as if he hadn't been there at all. Jake searched the bar and even checked outside, but there was no trace of him. The staff and patrons were equally puzzled, some joking nervously about ghosts or pranksters. But Jake felt a gnawing sense of dread that he couldn't shake. The next day, Jake learned that 2 patrons had gone missing that night, last seen near the bar's entrance. Their coats and belongings were found in a corner, but they were nowhere to be seen. Despite extensive investigations, their disappearances remain unsolved. Jake swears he knows who's responsible, though he'd never say it out loud. The man in the red coat haunts his memories to this day. After that night, Jake quit working as a bouncer, unwilling to face whatever darkness had walked into that bar. It was just past 2 a.m. at a dive bar on the outskirts of the city. Maria, the bartender, was cleaning up after last call. The other staff had left, leaving her alone to close. She'd done it hundreds of times before and didn't think twice about it. The bar's neon sign buzzed outside, casting a faint red glow through the windows. The silence inside was heavy, broken only by the occasional clink of glasses as Maria wiped down the counter. She was halfway through stacking chairs when she heard a faint knocking. It was coming from the back door, the one staff used to take out the trash. Maria frowned. No one should have been back there at this hour. She approached cautiously, her heart thudding in her chest as she peered through the peephole. No one was there. Hesitant but curious, she opened the door slightly, just enough to check. The alley was empty, save for a few scattered bottles and the soft hum of the street lamp overhead. Shaking her head, she locked the door again and went back to work. A few minutes later, the knocking returned. This time, it was louder, more insistent, almost frantic. Maria's pulse quickened as she grabbed the baseball bat they kept behind the bar for emergencies. She called out, "Who's there?" but was met with silence. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. A voice whispered through the crack of the door, "Let me in." The words were slow, deliberate, and distorted, as though they were being dragged through static. Maria froze. The voice sounded inhuman, guttural, and wrong. She backed away, clutching the bat tightly as the hair on her neck stood on end. Without warning, the knocking turned into violent banging. The entire door shook as if someone, or something, was trying to break it down. The sound was deafening, echoing through the empty bar. Maria's fight-or-flight instincts kicked in, and she bolted. She grabbed her keys, sprinted to the front door, and didn't stop running until she reached her car. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the ignition, but she didn't look back. The next morning, the owner called her, his voice tense and shaken. The back door had been ripped off its hinges, and deep claw marks were gouged into the frame and the surrounding wall. Security footage showed the door shaking violently as though being assaulted by an invisible force, but no one appeared in the video. The scene was so unnerving that the owner called the police, but they found no evidence of an intruder. Maria quit that day, her nerves too frayed to step foot in the bar again. The incident quickly became a legend among the staff, who made a strict rule to never stay alone after closing. Some say the bar is cursed, others believe it's haunted, but Maria's final shift remains a chilling reminder that some knocks are best left unanswered.